computer. All right, hi everyone. Welcome to today's call on community science and mine reclamation. Over the last couple months at Public Lab, we've been doing a research area review on this topic, which means we've been gathering and organizing resources on mine reclamation for community scientists, and also just talking to folks actively working on this area in local advocacy or in research. And for the first part of this call, what we wanted to do was share some of the highlights from that collective work from the last couple months, and then make space for an open discussion where we can share about additional resources or ideas, questions, or just even thoughts about what to do next. So we can start with some introductions since we've got a nice intimate group on the call. So I'll begin and then I'll hand it over to someone else. But I'm going to, we could share our name and where we're calling from, and then something you're interested about learning today or what might have brought you to this call. My name is Jeanette Lim. I'm the research manager at Public Lab, calling from Bellingham, Washington. And I'm just really looking forward to sharing about a lot of the work that Public Lab community members have been doing on this topic. So I will hand it over to Laurel, who's been working on this review with me.
Thank you, Jeanette. My name is Laurel Meir, and I am the Research Curation Fellow for Public Lab, focused on all topics land and soil, and I'm calling from New Orleans. And yeah, I'm just excited to share what we've been up to and also just have a space for discussion. And I will pass it off to Alana.
Hi all, my name's Alana Moore. I'm calling in from New Orleans. I use she, her pronouns. I need to add that to my little bio. I'm really excited about this because I don't know much about mines and mine reclamation since we don't really have mines down here in Louisiana. However, I'm into like labor and labor politics. I know there's the ongoing mine workers strike in Alabama. So interested to learn about, like possibilities for using those people who are striking for greater purposes and healthier purposes.
Either Liz or Stevie, do you want to do a quick intro?
Hi, thanks for hosting this, Jeanette. My name is Stevie Lewis-Class. I am calling in from Manhattan, New York, and my pronouns are she, her. And I've been following along with this review. I'm excited about the topic. I've been actually interested in working, loosely connected and following on mining issues for a long time, many years back in college and high school, actually. So I'm really excited to hear some updates and learn some new things. Check.
Thanks, Stevie. And Liz, if you're back, it'd be cool to have your intro. If you're not, then we can move on to, and then would be happy to hear from you when we have the open discussion part. So if you're not coming off video now, then we'll move on. All right, thanks everyone for the intros. So we're going to start with the presentation part of this to just guide us through some of those resources and methods on community science around mine reclamation. So I'm going to share my screen for a little bit, and then at about 15 minutes until the top of the hour is when we'll switch over to the open discussion time. Okie doke. So there's the slideshow. Let's get in full screen view. Okay, can you all see a title slide? Awesome. Okay, so Alana, similar to you, I actually started this review process with pretty little personal experience with the topic of mining and mine reclamation. But over the last couple months of doing this review, I've gotten to learn a lot, essentially from the community work that others have been doing on this topic. And I've been able to understand better the mining industry where I currently live. So this is a map of Bellingham, where I live now, and it's a place where remnants of underground coal mines from like the early 1900s remain throughout the city. So there's a city built on top, and this shows the extent, the purple here, of one historical coal mine. And then where you see all the red letters, these are like schools that exist now. This is all residential area. So yeah, this note, and there's a little note on the top right about, I guess, a part of the reclamation, which was the mine was flooded to the level of the local water table, which is like their way of like closing the mine, which I'm not thrilled about because we have a really high water table here. Anyway, yeah, getting to learn about just mining, mine reclamation, and especially like the legacy of mining in the US, I think is something that was really interesting coming out of this review. But what is reclamation? Broadly, it's the process of returning mined land to some beneficial end use. We'll talk about those quotes in a sec. But it can be a piecemeal process or progressive, where some parts of a mine are getting reclaimed while other parts are still active. Some related terms that can be used here, and it often varies sort of by country, can be remediation, restoration, or land rehabilitation. And then some of those examples, or commonly cited examples at least, of beneficial end uses have been turning that mined land into agricultural land. So for growing crops or for grazing. Also turning that into wildlife habitat or land for residential or commercial properties. So on sort of on the surface, mining or mine reclamation is supposed to be this positive thing, but there can be problems with that. So for instance, mine operators might not be abiding by the regulations that they're supposed to follow. They might be cutting corners, they may be using illegal practices in their reclamation. There might also not be enough money set aside by the mining companies to do the reclamation that they were supposed to do, or that they had applied to do in their initial permit. Now, even in the case where everyone is following the rules, it could be that the regulations themselves are just not sufficient to protect the safety of the people and the environment. Again, those could be loopholes, or there could be just lack of enforcement on regulations when there are violations found. And then that beneficial end use, there's a lot of room for interpretation there. So what does that even mean in the context of a place where it was one kind of landscape before? You can totally change the landscape to another kind, and it could be deemed still reclaimed. So that could be a potential issue. And then also, as some communities and researchers have pointed out, there can be a lot of focus on the technical aspects of reclamation, to the detriment of focus on any other aspects like the social and cultural aspects, especially after land has been damaged by mining. Community science comes in through environmental monitoring of reclaimed sites, observing and reporting violations, and then ultimately advocating for better regulations and accountability. So this is work that Public Lab community members and many others have been doing and documenting. And then the research area review that we did aimed to gather that information, that collective work along with other resources, and then ultimately help guide others who might be doing community science in this topic area as well. So a bit of housekeeping on that, where we have the latest posts and questions And also the people involved with this topic on Public Lab are at publiclab.org/tag/mine-reclamation. And I'm going to put all the links that are in this slideshow on our website later, so it'll be all available. And then where we have a little more background information, and then kind of connecting some of these materials together is on a new mine reclamation wiki page, which anyone who is signed into Public Lab website can edit, and we definitely encourage anyone to do so. So we chose this topic of mine reclamation for this latest review at Public Lab because people were actively engaged with this topic in their local community science work. And there were some pretty incredible learnings and resources coming out of that ongoing work. So I want to talk about some of those community science methods and approaches in use around mine reclamation, and then especially highlight the folks who are using these methods in their communities. And one approach involves monitoring for violations of regulations that mines are supposed to follow, and then reporting those violations to governing authorities. So an example of this approach for coal mines comes from the Mountains and Mines Monitoring Project. So this is a team that's working on issues in West Virginia, led by Junior Walk. And unfortunately, Junior isn't on the call right now, so he can't talk a little bit more about himself. So I'll try to do it a little bit of justice here. But they have created materials on violations that you can look for related to ones you'll see on the ground, related to ones you'll see in water, and then also air. So they've got written documentation on that, along with these videos where you can see examples of what those violations might look like. So they've got a lot of materials on how to spot these violations and then report them to the authority. So this is ongoing work from this fellowship team out of West Virginia. And another example of this approach is illustrated by the Sand Sentinel program that was created by Pat Popple and her collaborators. So Pat is a longtime community organizer who has been engaged with frac sand mines and reclamation in Wisconsin. So she's gone to public meetings, talked to other community members. She keeps up to date on happenings and shares them out in a newsletter. And then she also has been training residents to observe and report violations, in this case, around air, water, and transportation. And this is largely through photo documentation and also taking notes that from people who are making those observations with the senses, with their own senses. Now, in both of these examples, community members are using some form of photography to document the violations. And it could be on the ground photos, like these examples of discolored water. This is from the Sand Sentinel program. Or this other example of what was deemed like bad reclamation. This is from Washington State Department of Natural Resources, where you see some eroding slopes. Or you can use aerial photography or videography like the Mountain and Mines Monitoring Project. So they're using drones to capture this aerial videography, but balloon mapping or kite mapping are other approaches as well. Resources on aerial photography are on the Public Lab website at these locations here. I also wanted to add a little bit about another way to use aerial imagery that I've seen applied. And this is using the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI, to monitor plant health. So this is a measure for visualizing plant health that might be related to like revegetation efforts in reclamation. So some researchers have monitored NDVI measurements from aerial images over time to track overall plant health in reclaimed areas. And again, on Public Lab, we've got some materials on how to use accessible equipment to do these kinds of NDVI analyses. A different kind of approach to keeping tabs on mining and reclamation is to seek and review public records that mine operators have to submit before or during their mining operations. So for instance, mining companies need to apply for permits before they can start mining, and those applications for permits require reclamation plans. Finding public records of those permit applications and what the plans are is a great getting started activity to see essentially what is planned for an area. So you can see what kind of mining activities are being proposed, and then also what the companies are saying they'll do to reclaim the site when the mining stops. So we do have an activity on the Public Lab website that includes an editable spreadsheet where anyone can go and add information on different states or localities on where to find these public records. So we've added a few states in the US there, but we'd love for that resource to grow as people encounter the information on how to get those public records. Then once mining is underway, companies can also be required to file reports on their permitted activities. For example, discharge monitoring reports, or DMRs. These are supposed to document discharges of wastewater from mining activities and ensure that pollutant levels from that wastewater are staying under a threshold limit. So this is another place that violations can happen. The Appalachian Water Watch has a terrific citizen monitoring manual, which you can find online, and then we'll again provide the link on the Public Lab website later. They have guidance on how to obtain DMRs and what to look for that might indicate a violation of that discharge permit. So those can be things like missing data or like suspiciously repeated numbers. They've got a great set of things to keep an eye out for. And then a couple other approaches to highlight for community scientists are methods for monitoring water quality and then also soil health as reclamation is happening. The water quality in waterways that are connected to mining sites can be negatively impacted by mining activities and then ostensibly improved through reclamation. So this is one way to monitor if reclamation is having an effect on reducing problems with water quality in an area. So again, that citizen monitoring manual from Appalachian Water Watch has terrific information on how to use online topographic maps to identify hotspots around mines where it might be a good idea to do that water quality testing. And in the guide there, and also on the website, and here we emphasize staying safe and not trespassing so that the data that you collect can be used for the purposes you want it to. Some of the water quality parameters that can be particularly affected by mining are pH and conductivity. So pH is an indication of how acidic or alkaline the water is. And for fresh water that's friendly to life, the pH needs to be somewhere between 6.5 and 9. And mining can make water surrounding mining sites much more acidic or alkaline than this, depending exactly on what kind of mining is happening and what minerals that water is interacting with. Conductivity is a measure of how easily an electric current can pass through the water, and things that are dissolved in the water like salts and metals and other minerals can make that conductivity higher. And similar to pH, there's a range within which living things can survive, and then really high values can indicate the presence of a lot of dissolved pollutants. So again, the Public Lab website has some materials on pH and conductivity and specifically sensors for community science. And on the topic of soil health, that can similarly be monitored for indications of pollution and reclamation progress. So some parameters that could be measured here, again, are pH, also heavy metal concentrations. metals can come from mining waste and then deposit on or in the soil. And another neat indicator of soil health is the living things that are in the soil. How happy are they? How active are they? So these are things like microbes and other biological things, other organisms that are present in the soil and tend to operate a certain way when they're in healthy soil. So we've got some methods on Public Lab on soil monitoring at the link there, publiclab.org/methods#soil. And right now I'm going to pass it on to Laurel to talk a little bit more about soil health and reclamation.
Yes, thank you, Jeanette. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay, sorry, my yellow didn't come up like I was talking. Okay, so yeah, I just want to talk a little bit more specifically about using soil health as a tool to evaluate the success of the reclamation efforts undertaken at a mining site, because at its core, reclamation is truly an effort to restore the harm done to a mined land soil health. And from an ecosystem perspective, a healthy soil is really the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. And so using soil health as an indicator of successful reclamation will hopefully foreshadow ecosystem restoration, flourishing plant life, maybe even like wildlife return, depending on what the beneficial end use is for the land, and so on. So while any of the methods mentioned to monitor soil health will give a good indication of reclamation success, there are two methods that researchers have presented specifically for the soils of mine reclamation sites. And so they are listed here. First, using bioassays of soils for mycorrhizal fungi, and also measuring something called the dehydrogenase activity, which is a soil enzyme. And so without getting too into the weeds of those methods, they both really aim to measure an aspect of soil health that indicates both present and future health and viability. To this point, it really isn't enough to just see new vegetation that may have been planted on a reclaimed site. Instead, you want to ask questions: can this vegetation survive on its own? Has nutrient cycling, like Jeanette mentioned, has that been restored? Are the important relationships between the plants and soil fungi reestablished? So these methods aim to answer those questions rather than just taking revegetation of reclaimed land as an indicator of this has been a successful project. So if you want to switch to the next slide for me, thank you. So Public Lab's website has a new wiki on evaluating the success of mine reclamation that holds information on soil health and how it can be used as an indicator of reclamation success, some of the specific methods I just mentioned, and ideas on how to improve soil health if those methods indicate problems. So we also have a new tag for within the reclamation arena for evaluating reclamation, and those we'll also tag those when we share all of our links. So thank you. I'll hand it back over to Jeanette.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. So the methods that we talked about a little earlier that involve engaging with regulatory authorities in some way, they're all part of advocating for accountability. So as we're just nearing the end of this presentation highlight reel, I wanted to just share a few other resources relevant to advocacy that we came across in the review. So this one, again, is from Pat Popple, who recently shared an approach that she's taken in her advocacy around frac sand mines and reclamation in Wisconsin. And she created this handout that clearly identifies what she calls minimum expectations of Chippewa County residents. So these are the expectations for around the health and safety around these issues of frac sand mines and reclamation. And she presented it to members of the Chippewa County Land Conservation and Forest Management Committee. And she attended a meeting, like we had mentioned. She's been going to meetings and making her voice heard, and shared this with the committee members there. And one of them has it on their office wall to remind themselves of what they're accountable for to the community. So it's an example of a win in terms of local advocacy. A link to this handout that Pat created is on the Mine Reclamation Wiki page, and along with links to other resources, including this really incredible collection of advocacy resources from Coal River Mountain Watch. It's specific to West Virginia, but a lot of the approaches and strategies in there could be applied to other locations. So again, on the Wiki page, we would love to hear from anyone else who has experience or tips and to contribute to that editable wiki. And then finally, just some wanting to end with some ideas for where research on this topic could potentially go next. One is identifying advocacy pathways that elevate some of these issues to a federal level, especially if state level agencies are not proving to be adequate in their responses. And then hopefully at the federal level, there would be more uptake. Also, for those folks who are in the policy realm, policy reform for more public participation in reclamation planning and then throughout the entire operation of a mine. So based on research by folks who are studying mine remediation, Caitlin Bennett is someone who is studying this, and I had the pleasure of talking with her earlier this week. There's a lot of room for improvement here, especially in approaching reclamation more holistically. It's kind of what we were mentioning at the beginning of this presentation, not only focusing on those technical solutions, but what are some of the opportunities to repair relationships with communities, and then also just involve them from the start. It does look like there's some developments on that front in different countries, but there's a lot of opportunity there to have that be baked into the policy. On the technical side of things, there's also opportunity to develop and test methods for community scientists to use satellite imagery like Landsat imagery to do remote monitoring of surface mining and reclamation over time. And then similarly to develop, this is an example I actually ported over from agriculture, is develop sensor networks for monitoring soil and water quality around mining sites so that we can have information on potential pollution in real time. Because many of these events can be ephemeral, being able to catch indications of a problem in real time might be able to provide us some more information. So this is the end of our presentation part and our last slide, which is a welcome to anyone who wants to join Public Lab. We would love to have you there, and you can sign up for free at publiclab.org and follow topics that interest you. The topics we've been posting under for this review are mine reclamation, mining, and reclamation. We'd love to hear anyone's questions, ideas, or research notes, and then also to just drop into a call if you're interested in talking to folks and meeting them, which we have listed at publiclab.org/events. So thank you all for joining and listening as we've been talking now, and I'd love to hand it over to Laurel so we can open up the discussion.
Sure, thank you. Okay. So I guess to begin, maybe we can just, if anyone has any reaction, feedback, I related to this, I didn't relate to this, or just any thoughts that came up from the presentation, or, you know, this wasn't clear, circle back. Yeah, if there's any reactions there, welcome them.
I have a question about the, I guess, like federal approach to this issue. I know that there's a big thing in Louisiana where we have a ton of like abandoned oil wells, that there was just a lot of money given to reclaiming those. So I was wondering, is there any sort of like federal initiative to deal with this, or is this a purely community driven issue?
Yeah, Laurel, do you want me to take this one?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to have you add to as well, because I'm sure I'll forget something. But yeah, it's a good question. So for coal mining in particular, the federal government does have an abandoned mine land program, which they use fees collected from currently active mining companies to fund a pot of money that then they can use to reclaim abandoned mining land. And I think just this year or just late last year, they renewed that program through sometime in 2030. How successful it's been is a big question mark. And also, like, that's just for coal mines. Beyond that, I wasn't able to find a lot of great information on for other types of minerals or like oil and gas developments, what sort of money they have for abandoned mine lands there. Laurel, I know you did a good bit of research on abandoned mine lands and whether there's like maybe other programs. I don't know if you encountered any for something other than coal.
Yeah, well, you had mentioned Louisiana specifically, and I want to, I'm looking for a research note that Scott Eustace had just put on the website that's actually talking about, I'm not very familiar with Louisiana, you know, we don't have any mines here. But here is a research note that Scott just posted about kind of it gives a little bit of an overview of the general attitude, I guess, towards mine reclamation in Louisiana. And it seems like people, or a direct quote is that it's too difficult and politically impossible. They're trying to reclaim area as wetlands for Louisiana specifically. That's obviously a very specific regional option. But yeah, so he had just posted sort of a methodology as research note as well about using different, like a classification system for using aerial photography to try to see, I guess, where wetlands could be a plausible approach for reclamation in Louisiana. So yeah, that's kind of just a taste there. But yeah, speaking generally about abandoned mines, it seems to definitely fall on the states, and there's not much federal, not many clear avenues if your state isn't pulling its weight there. Unfortunately, is what we pretty much found.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but take a look at that research note, because it's interesting just to kind of get, you know, it seems like this may not be an issue in Louisiana, but it manages to still be. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was so impressed, Laurel, with your techniques for evaluating how successful a reclamation project is. So often, you know, once big money is mobilized for big engineering to come make a move, there's rarely any evaluation of that. So I just want to really, just like elevate that and appreciate it. And it kind of reminds me, there was a project up in coastal New York where the Army Corps of Engineers was doing a lot of wetland replanting, and this was led by Gina Worth with SCAPE and the Dredge Collective. And then the American Littoral Society was also doing a lot of wetland replanting. Both groups planting grasses in sandbars, doing it completely differently. It was left to community scientists to actually evaluate which giant method was actually working out. So it's a neat site for accountability that I'm really glad you created. Yeah, it created more pathways for people on this.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it can seem like if the reclamation project is done and has a bow on it, and action has stopped, that you take their word for it that it's it's good enough. But yeah, and in learning about it, it definitely seems like just planting vegetation seems to be like maybe a nice band-aid over the scars. But yeah, trying to understand the approach of like, or is it native plants? Are the plants maybe helping address pH issues? Yeah, so providing space for that to grow, hopefully. Yeah, and one other thing about the wetlands restoration, also in that post, really a lot of my knowledge about it is from Scott's post, so I'll keep circling back to that. But it's interesting to see that people are deeming, or politicians mostly, are deeming it impossible for that to be a plausible reclamation activity, when there's so much evidence that like all the floods, either flooding from the south or from the north coming down the Mississippi, if we just had more wetlands, that's the number one way you can address those events. And yeah, it's still impossible somehow. Yeah, so interesting. Okay, another thing we could maybe circle back to is that conversation about a more holistic approach to mine reclamation, and sort of getting past obviously the technical fixes are important, and there are things to be addressed there, but kind of getting a more holistic perspective, and the culture of if the people on the land are culturally tied to the land, and the certain social aspects, community involvement, and input throughout the process, not just on the evaluation side. And so Jeanette and I were able to speak to a researcher named Caitlin, who is working actually in Canada mostly, with different Indigenous groups, trying to address the mining situation. And so I will drop this link to a website she shared with us. It's a group, or a research group out of Australia, actually, with the University of Queensland. And they're called the social aspects of mine. They call it mine closure, I guess, officially. And so they're doing some interesting work about involving the community, acknowledging the history of the land, and yeah, really just trying to get more historical, political, social dimensions within the process. Yeah, so if anyone wants to take a look at that, and if that resonates.
Yeah, thanks for that link. I've been really impressed with the work coming out of this group. I think we also, I think I've seen some reports from them recently as well. I also wanted to say how much I appreciated Jeanette's overview of what methods were available. I just felt like the pace of that walkthrough, method by method, really helped me learn. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that. And maybe since we also have an archaeologist on the call, I don't know if anyone might comment. It's something I feel like I've heard before out in the ecosystem of local people fighting against mines. I feel like this is maybe less on reclamation and more on just not having them, but ground penetrating radar in order to detect burial grounds, I feel like has come up sometimes. Does that have anything to do with reclamation, or is there any comment on that? And no is an okay answer.
What you mean in terms of reclamation? Like, yeah, can you explain better the connections between the two?
I'm not sure if there is one. It was just like a mining related method that I've heard people use, and then I realized this review is all about how do we reclaim, how do we understand reclamation projects. So yeah, I didn't know if there was anything else that historical archaeology would help with.
I can't think of speaking, I'm jumping on this one as the archaeology girl, and just because I've done GPR stuff, and like that is something that is, I feel very useful in turn, I think, in like reclaiming space otherwise, but like for most burial grounds, if they were mining in or around it, they're all shook up and like messed up anyway, kind of thing, you know? So yeah, I'm thinking now how interesting it is that the word reclamation in my mind is kind of like tied to mining, that there's like this movement around mine reclamation, but there's like less, like we could call a lot of the work we're doing in environmental justice reclamation, like we're reclaiming something from a previous use. But yeah, are we oil field reclaiming kind of thing? Or yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. The answer to your question, I feel, is not to my knowledge, Liz.
Cool. I realize this. I have some questions, but they're kind of geared towards the community science people, boots on the ground, but we can discuss it as well. I guess just we all have experience a little bit, me less so, but with navigating the relationship between technical fixes and a more community involved holistic approach, and having conversations with people who by default have the technical mindset. And yeah, I guess if anyone has just experience or advice on closing that gap, or maybe the false gap, or the idea that there needs to be a gap between those two sides of the more technical and the more holistic, social, community involved approach to community science in general, not even mine reclamation. Yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Not sure. Could you rephrase or present this question again?
Yes, yeah. What has been your experience navigating, I guess, the relationship between the technical aspects of community science and things like advocacy and community involvement, and bridging the gap between people who go in those different directions? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'll hazard something and then everyone can pile on or pile off, pile in. Is that I think this is what we're in right now. This is a public lab gathering where the organizers of this community overall have tried to make the culture a place that can support both techno science style as well as like local activism style, and have them like coexist. That said, I think there is a little bit of there still is unique aspects of these cultures, and different aspects are like ascendant at different times. So ultimately, people are standing for what they stand on. So these problems are owned by residents and constituents who are nearby and being like directly affected by these issues. People remotely can add support, but ultimately there's so many issues that mostly people are advocating in their area. But that said, there's so much creativity and sense that the world can be changed, and like gaining access to like enhancements for our own sensorium by people from the technical development hacking world hanging out with local organizers, that I think there's there's a way that doing spectacular science in public can get kids running up to you and you know, get your issue in heightened awareness by even entirely other organizations, maybe who had seen like their own version of the issue, and maybe now you can work together. Oh, your campaign is growing because you did spectacular accessible science, and now more people are starting to look around, and it's a thing we can do together, is talk about what we all saw. And all of a sudden you've got kind of a campaign rolling as part of gathering information. There is a way that technological development can slow down advocacy, in the sense that if novel tech development is like really, like if someone really wants to do it, I think people who are less familiar with like hardware development cycles can be taken off guard by like the extreme number of like attempts and failures and dead ends that development might go in, and the absolute like unknownness of the timeline of developing new tech. And that can really be detrimental to a project. And so in a lot of ways, I understand the work that you're contributing to, Laurel and Jeanette, as providing like a brave space in the community science ecosystem for tech development to follow its own timelines and courses, and then as facilitators bring in what's relevant to local struggles. And ideally, we all get together during the barn raisings and have a big old party about it. Okay, I will pile out in case anyone wants to pile in.
I can hop in because I was going to say, I feel personally like what you said, Liz, was not really clear to me until attending barn raisings and getting to have these kind of like, because I was going to barn raisings, or first started to, when I was maybe 19 years old. I was an undergrad. I was still doing archaeology. I was going because it was where I'm from. And like, yeah, I care about where I'm from, but I had never been in the experience of like people not from Louisiana or from, down in Cocodrie caring or even wanting to talk about it. So like having folks that were scientists, were experts in their fields, confirming my teenage existential dread was really meaningful to me, and really like helped me to understand the holistic nature of like doing science for the sake of doing science, or for the sake of like grants and funding and academic accolades, is kind of silly. Like, you're writing papers no one's going to read, sort of thing. You are tooting your own horn all day versus actually being in spaces with people that don't have the same credentials that you do, and actually are like benefiting and gaining from your expertise, kind of thing. Talking about like these computer scientists I'm speaking to who, yeah, like I don't know anything about computer science, but they were really interested in what I had to say about what I had experienced there, because they were working on these projects. So like, I'm thinking of Public Lab as like a really great tool to bridge those gaps between people that seemingly would not have things in common, but actually do. And that's kind of like where I think the community organizers are super essential to this work, because in the end, a lot of scientists are not trained in like media sort of thing. They're not able to write the paper that says, here's how you cure cancer, and then actually go on CNN and say, here's how I did it. Like, you're needing those more communicative, more community organized, more like of the people type people to really get this information into the hands of the people that need it. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in bridging these gaps, and a lot of it is like breaking down the imaginary structures of like academia, ivory tower, borders, whatever, that really aren't real, so that we can actually do good work and organize and change the world, maybe, or at least make it slightly more livable.
Is that what you thought we might say, Laurel?
Yeah, I mean, Public Lab has really helped me get, even, I mean, obviously we're all living in the coronavirus time, so I haven't been able to participate in any barn raisings or anything, but I'm hoping that maybe down the line I could. But yeah, public lab, I guess, aside from all the other things, it's helped me grow in, yeah, really understanding how to, or I guess just the importance of having conversations like this, where we kind of acknowledge areas where we can grow, areas where certain community science initiatives have fallen through the cracks because they've been lacking in certain whatever they're lacking in. So yeah, I think that that was pretty much what I was hoping to hear, I guess. Yeah, and I don't know, Jeanette, do you think we're okay to, I guess, say thank you and wrap things up?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Also open to final closing thoughts or anything has come to mind since we've been talking too.
I have a question regarding the fellowship of the folks doing mine work right now. Are they doing any sort of like public facing conversation about their work?
That's a good question. And I Stevie would be a good person to comment on that. I mean, they have all their posts on the website as that public facing work. And I know Junior is active with other organizations locally that have been advocating on this issue for a while. But beyond that, I don't have the details. So that's a good question for,
Okay,
yeah.
just wondering. Because yeah, I want to chat with someone who's there and doing it kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that'll happen soon, I'm sure. Cool,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think it will happen soon. And one thing about that fellowship team is that there's a documentary filmmaker as one of the fellows. And so there's going to be there already is really great video content coming out of there. But yeah, let's look ahead to that conversation. If today wasn't it, let's book it. Thank you so much, Jeanette and Laurel, for organizing this. I was really impressed with this content, and it's just, yeah, so important for all those reasons, like Alana was laying out, like, hey, we're here, all this stuff is going on. We do believe that we can make things more livable, and here's some methods. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you all for coming and engaging. And Laurel, yeah, you're
Oh, no, yeah, I was just gonna shout out you guys for participating in the discussion so eloquently and yeah, stepping in and elevating our work so that we can elevate other people's work.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Thanks, appreciate y'all.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.
All right,
Bye,
thank
y'all.
y'all.